My name is Rachel, I'm 34 years old, and I've learned that family revenge stories don't begin with grand gestures, they begin with a text message that reads Sunday dinner, 6 p.m., bring wine, and carries the weight of 3 decades of unspoken expectations. My mother's invitation arrived on a Wednesday morning while I was between meetings, and I stared at it for a full minute before responding. There was no question mark, no if you're available, no acknowledgement that I might have other plans. Just a statement of fact, a summons disguised as an invitation. I should have recognized it immediately for what it was, the opening move in a carefully orchestrated performance. But some part of me, the part that still hoped for different outcomes despite years of identical patterns, typed "I'll be there" before my rational brain could intervene. The dinner was set at my parents' house, and as the days passed, I received confirmation that this wasn't going to be an intimate family meal. My sister Lauren texted to say she'd be there with her husband Brad and their 3 kids. My brother Mike called to ask if I knew what this was about, his voice tight with the same apprehension I was feeling. "Mom just said it was important family time," he told me. But you know how she gets when she says important. Could be anything from announcing they're redecorating to staging a full-scale intervention. We laughed, but it was the nervous laughter of people who'd been through enough family drama to know that the worst-case scenario was often the most accurate prediction. The emotional abuse in families rarely announces itself with warning labels. It dresses up as tradition, as togetherness, as quality time. I'd been doing well lately, really well, not just performing wellness for their benefit. I'd started my own consulting business 2 years ago after leaving the corporate job my parents had pressured me into. The business was thriving, my client list was growing, and for the first time in my adult life, I was waking up excited about work instead of dreading it. I'd also been seeing someone, David, a high school teacher who was kind and thoughtful and completely wrong for me according to my parents' criteria because he didn't make 6 figures or work in what they considered a serious profession. I'd been keeping the relationship quiet, learning from past experiences that sharing my personal life with my family only gave them ammunition for criticism disguised as concern. What I expected was neutrality, maybe even peace. I'd been maintaining careful boundaries with my parents for the past year, keeping conversations surface level, deflecting invasive questions, limiting my visits to major holidays and obligatory events. My therapist had helped me develop what she called strategic distance, close enough to maintain the relationship, far enough to protect my sanity. I thought maybe the boundaries were working, that maybe we'd found a sustainable equilibrium. The toxic family dynamics that had defined most of my 20s and early 30s seemed to have quieted down, or so I'd convinced myself. Arriving at my childhood home that Sunday evening, smelling the familiar scent of my mother's pot roast and seeing the dining room table set with her best china, I realized I'd been deluding myself. The drama hadn't quieted, it had just been gathering reinforcements. The witnesses were assembled with military precision when I walked through the door. My parents occupied their traditional positions at opposite ends of the dining table like monarchs presiding over their court. Lauren sat on one side with Brad and their children Emma, Oliver, and little Sophie, their presence serving multiple functions, proof that Lauren had achieved the life milestones my parents valued, built an audience for whatever was about to unfold, and living evidence that some children in this family knew how to make their parents proud. Mike sat across from them with his fiancée Ashley, both looking vaguely uncomfortable in a way that suggested they'd been briefed on tonight's agenda but weren't entirely comfortable with their assigned roles. The empty chair between them was clearly designated for me, positioned to maximize my visibility to everyone at the table. The public family dinner setup was unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up in this house. This wasn't about sharing a meal, it was about creating a controlled environment with witnesses who would either validate my parents' narrative or remain politely silent while it unfolded. The good china, the formal table setting, the Sunday pot roast that my mother only made for special occasions, it all pointed to an event that had been planned, rehearsed, scripted. My mother hugged me at the door, holding on just a fraction too long, her perfume the same expensive brand she'd worn my entire life. "Rachel, sweetheart, we're so glad you could make it. We have so much to talk about." My father nodded from his position at the head of the table, his expression neutral but his eyes calculating. "Rachel. Good. Now we can begin." I sat down in my designated seat, accepted the glass of wine Lauren poured for me, and tried to ignore the anxiety building in my chest. The family control was already evident in the way they'd orchestrated this gathering, the timing, the guest list, the seating arrangement. Everything was designed to put me in a specific position, both literally and figuratively. My nieces and nephews were coloring quietly at a smaller table in the corner, their presence ensuring that whatever happened would be kept civil and appropriate. Brad was scrolling through his phone with that checked-out expression he always wore at family gatherings, already performing his role as the son-in-law who knew better than to get involved. Ashley kept glancing at Mike with questions in her eyes, probably wondering what she'd signed up for by agreeing to marry into this family. The emotional trigger that would define everything came during the salad course, casual and devastating in equal measure. My mother set down her fork with practiced delicacy and smiled at me across the table. "Rachel, sweetheart, before we go any further, I just want to say how grateful we are that you're here. How grateful you should be, really, that we're willing to have this conversation with you instead of just letting you continue down this path you're on." The family pressure at dinner was already building, and we hadn't even reached the main course. My father cleared his throat, that particular sound that meant he was about to say something he considered profound, and looked directly at me. "Your mother and I have been very patient. Very understanding about your choices. But patience has limits, Rachel. And we think it's time we had an honest conversation about your future, your responsibilities, and what it means to be grateful for everything this family has given you." In that moment, I knew exactly what this dinner was going to be: a public family dinner designed to remind me of my place, to reassert control I'd been slowly escaping, to break me down in front of witnesses who would either participate or enable through their silence. I had two choices: play the role they expected and defend myself until I eventually capitulated the way I always had, or do something different. Something they would never see coming. I just didn't know yet what that something would be. My mother passed the salad bowl with the kind of deliberate care that signaled she was about to say something significant. "Sweetheart, we're worried about you. We've been worried for quite some time, actually." The way she said worried made it sound like a diagnosis, something serious that required immediate intervention. This was how controlling parents operated. They framed their need for control as parental concern, their manipulation as love, their invasion as care. I felt my shoulders tense, but I stayed quiet, waiting to see how this ambush would unfold. My father jumped in right on cue, his voice carrying that reasonable tone he always used when saying something completely unreasonable. "You're 34 years old, Rachel. You should be settled by now. Instead, you're running some little consulting business out of your apartment, living alone, still acting like you're in your 20s figuring things out. We're not saying you have to change everything overnight," my mother continued, serving generous portions of salad onto everyone's plates as if we were discussing weekend plans instead of my entire life. "But you need to start being realistic about where you're headed. This consulting thing, it's fine as a side project, but it's not a real career. It's not stable. It's not what we raised you for." She looked at Lauren, who nodded sympathetically, already complicit in whatever intervention this was becoming. "Your sister understood this. She made smart choices, married well, had children, built a real life. Why can't you see that we're just trying to help you do the same?" The emotional abuse in families is particularly insidious when it disguises itself as wisdom, as if 3 decades of living under their roof somehow gave them more insight into my happiness than I had myself. My father pulled out a folder, an actual manila folder, like he'd been compiling evidence for a case, and set it on the table next to his plate. "Let's talk facts, Rachel. You're spending 60% of your income on rent for a 1-bedroom apartment when you could move somewhere more affordable and save money. You're working 80-hour weeks for clients who could drop you at any moment. You're not building equity. You're not investing in your future. You're not even dating anyone seriously." He paused, glancing at my mother, and I realized this was a coordinated attack, a presentation they'd rehearsed together. "We've been more than patient. We supported you through college, through that failed engagement to watch us name, through your various career changes. But patience has its limits, and frankly, we think you need to hear some hard truths. Don't embarrass us by being defensive about this," my mother added, her voice taking on that edge it always got when she sensed resistance. "We're trying to help you, sweetheart. We can see things you can't see because you're too close to the situation. That's what parents are for, to provide perspective when you're making mistakes you're too stubborn to recognize. She turned to Mike, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Your brother agrees with us. We've all been talking about this, about how concerned we are about your trajectory. The triangulation was textbook, making me defend myself not just to my parents, but to a family consensus I hadn't been invited to participate in. The toxic family dynamics were on full display, and everyone except me seemed to think this was normal, this was love, this was what families did for each other. Brad, of all people, decided to contribute his perspective. Rachel, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but when I was your age, I was already married with 2 kids and a mortgage. There's something to be said for following a traditional path, for not overthinking things. You get married, you have kids, you build stability. That's what adults do. He said it with such earnest conviction, such practiced sincerity, that I almost believed he was genuinely trying to help rather than performing for my parents. Brad had always been the perfect son-in-law, the one who'd seamlessly integrated into the family by agreeing with everything my parents said, by never questioning their narrative, by treating their opinions as facts. His contribution wasn't about helping Mike, it was about maintaining his own position in the family hierarchy by supporting the approved worldview. My mother brought out the main course, her famous pot roast, the one she'd been making for Sunday dinners since I was a child, and with it came the real agenda. We've actually been doing some thinking, some planning, she said, carving the roast with practiced precision. And we have a proposal that we think will help you get your life back on track. She paused dramatically, waiting for me to ask what it was, but I refused to play along. The silence stretched uncomfortable and heavy until my father continued anyway. There's an opening at Brad's firm. His company is looking for someone with your background to work in their corporate communications department. It's a real job, Rachel. Real salary, real benefits, real stability. Brad's already put in a good word for you. All you have to do is show up to the interview. The family control disguised as opportunity was suffocating. They'd planned this, coordinated it, packaged it as a gift when it was really a cage. Taking a corporate job at Brad's firm would mean daily oversight, constant reports back to my family about my performance, the slow erosion of every boundary I'd worked so hard to establish. My father opened the folder he'd brought and pulled out a job description, salary information, benefits package details. We're talking about nearly double what you're probably making now with your consulting business. Health insurance. Retirement matching. Paid vacation. This is a real opportunity, Rachel. The kind that doesn't come along often. The kind you'd be foolish to refuse. The silent power reversal I'd been working toward in therapy felt impossibly distant, buried under the weight of their generous offer and the expectation that I should be grateful for their interference. Be grateful that we care enough to do this for you, my mother said, her eyes glistening with what might have been genuine emotion or might have been performance. With her, it was always impossible to tell. Most parents would just let their children flounder. But we love you too much to watch you waste your potential. We're offering you a chance to have a real life, the kind of life we've always wanted for you. Lauren nodded enthusiastically, probably remembering how she'd taken a similar path, how she'd accepted the life my parents had scripted for her and found it easier than fighting. Mom's right, Rach. You've been doing this consulting thing for 2 years now. How much longer are you going to keep pretending it's a sustainable career? Don't you want stability? Don't you want what I have? She gestured to her children, her husband, her entire carefully constructed existence. The guilt at dinner was reaching toxic levels, and I could feel myself starting to suffocate under it, starting to wonder if maybe they were right, if maybe I was being foolish and stubborn and ungrateful. That's how they got you. They made you doubt your own reality until their version seemed like the only truth, the only path, the only way to finally earn the approval you'd been chasing your entire life. The pot roast was perfect, just like it always was, but I could barely taste it as my mother began the systematic rewriting of my history. You know, Rachel's always been like this, she said to Ashley, as if I weren't sitting right there, as if she were discussing a case study rather than her daughter. Even as a child, she had this stubborn streak. Always questioning things, always wanting to do things her own way. We thought she'd outgrow it, learn to accept guidance from people who knew better. But here we are, 34 years old, and she's still fighting against common sense. My father nodded, cutting his pot roast into precise, identical pieces. We've tried everything: gentle encouragement, tough love, giving her space to learn from her own mistakes. Nothing works. She just keeps making the same poor decisions over and over. The family humiliation was being served family style, passed around the table for everyone to sample and validate. Lauren jumped in with her own carefully curated memories, anecdotes I recognized but filtered through a lens designed to make me seem lost and foolish. Remember when she turned down that amazing job offer right out of college? The one at the consulting firm that Dad's friend arranged for her? Guaranteed six-figure salary within 5 years, and she walked away because she wanted to find her passion or whatever. She used air quotes around the phrase, making my legitimate desire for meaningful work sound like a childish fantasy. We all tried to explain that you don't find your passion by wandering aimlessly through your 20s and 30s, but Rachel has never been good at listening to people who actually have life experience. The way she said it, with such patient disappointment, made my choices sound like symptoms of a character defect rather than legitimate decisions about my own life. My father started pulling out specific examples, a greatest hits compilation of my failures as he saw them. The engagement that ended when I was 28, we told her he wasn't ambitious enough, but she wouldn't listen, and look how that turned out. The apartment I'd rented in what he considered an overpriced neighborhood, throwing money away on rent when she could have bought a condo with our help. The consulting business I'd started instead of taking a corporate position, wasting her MBA on freelance work that anyone could do. Each story was presented as evidence of a pattern, proof that I was incapable of making sound decisions, that I desperately needed their intervention now before it was too late. Reality was being rewritten in front of others, and Ashley sat there absorbing it all, nodding sympathetically, probably grateful she was marrying the sensible sibling instead of the problematic one. The thing is, my mother said, her voice heavy with maternal suffering, we've enabled this behavior. We've been too lenient, too accepting of her choices when we should have been firmer. We should have insisted she take that corporate job. We should have pushed harder when she ended her engagement. We've let her make mistake after mistake because we didn't want to seem controlling. She turned to me then, her expression a perfect blend of love and disappointment that she'd perfected over 3 decades. Sweetheart, we gave you the best education money could buy. We supported you through every phase and whim. We never said no to you. And look where that got you. A daughter who's 34, unmarried, running a business that could collapse at any moment, living alone with no real prospects for the future we know you deserve. The silence from the table reinforced control in ways that words never could. Nobody contradicted her revisionist history, nobody offered an alternative perspective, nobody pointed out that maybe, just maybe, I was building exactly the life I wanted. Mike decided to pile on, probably because he'd been coached on his role before I arrived. Rach, I say this because I love you. You need to wake up. You're living in this fantasy world where you think independence and passion are more important than stability and family. But real adults understand that sometimes you have to do things you don't love for the sake of building a real future. Look at me, I'm not passionate about insurance sales, but I do it because it provides security. That's what grown-ups do. He gestured to Ashley beside him. Ashley gets it. She works in accounting, not because she dreamed about spreadsheets as a kid, but because it's stable and allows us to plan for a real future together. Marriage, kids, a house, that's what matters. Not chasing some idealized version of fulfillment that probably doesn't even exist. My mother pulled out her phone and started showing Ashley pictures, not recent pictures of me, but photos from years ago, from college, from my early 20s when I'd looked different, dressed more conservatively, smiled more easily for the camera. This is who Rachel used to be, she said, swiping through images like she was mourning someone had died. Happy, social, normal. She dated appropriate men, had a clear career path, seemed like she was on track. But somewhere along the way, she decided she was too special for an ordinary life. She had to be different, had to prove something. She showed a picture of me at my MBA graduation, surrounded by family. Look how proud we were that day. Look how much hope we had for her future. We thought she'd finally gotten serious about life. And then she just threw it all away to play entrepreneur. Lauren shared her observations, painting a picture of me as someone perpetually on the verge of crisis. She never has time for family anymore because she's always working, even though we all know consulting from home isn't real work. She can't contribute to family gifts the way she used to. She drives a car that's 6 years old. She hasn't taken a real vacation in years. Her apartment is barely furnished because she's always worried about cash flow. And for what? So she can tell herself she's independent? So she can feel superior to those of us who made practical choices? Her voice cracked slightly, and I realized this wasn't entirely about Med. His was about her own compromises, her own surrendered dreams, projected onto me because my continued pursuit of autonomy was a mirror reflecting everything she'd given up. But she couldn't see that, wouldn't see it, and so the assault continued with her enthusiastic participation. My father delivered what he clearly thought was the killing blow. Be grateful, Rachel. Be grateful that we care enough to have this conversation. Be grateful that we're willing to help you course correct before it's too late. Be grateful that Brad is willing to put his professional reputation on the line to get you this interview. He opened the folder again and pulled out more papers, a timeline, apparently, of what he called my declining trajectory over the past 6 years. Charts showing my theoretical lost earnings compared to if I'd taken that corporate job. Calculations of what my retirement account could have been. Projections of where I'd be financially if I'd made better choices. The public humiliation was complete. They'd systematically dismantled my sense of self, my choices, my entire adult life, all while presenting it as concern, all while insisting I should be grateful for their invasion. And everyone at the table, except me, seemed to think this was reasonable, normal, the way families were supposed to operate. The toxic family dynamics had never been more visible, yet somehow everyone was still pretending this was love. Something shifted in me between the pot roast and whatever dessert my mother had undoubtedly prepared to punctuate this intervention. A quiet transformation, like ice turning to water, like a switch flipping from off to on. I stopped trying to defend myself, stopped opening my mouth to correct their distortions, stopped feeling that desperate, suffocating need to make them understand. Instead, I did something I'd never done before at one of these family gatherings. I became completely still and just observed. Really observed. My therapist had been drilling this into me for months. Silent observation is power. Stepping back and documenting what's actually happening can break the spell of emotional abuse in families. So I sat there, fork in hand, and I became a researcher studying a toxic ecosystem, cataloging every manipulation technique, every guilt trip, every carefully constructed distortion. I listened, truly listened to the patterns in their speech, and it was like hearing a song I'd known all my life but never really understood the lyrics to until this moment. My father would make a declarative statement framed as objective truth. My mother would add an emotional layer, usually involving her suffering or disappointment. Lauren would provide the successful sibling perspective that made their position seem validated by results. Mike would offer the concerned brother angle that suggested even my peers recognized I was struggling. Brad would give the outsider validation that implied even people who married into this family could see the obvious truth about my failures. It was choreography, a 5-person performance they'd perfected over years, maybe decades. Every role was assigned. Every beat was timed. Every response was designed to corner me, to make resistance seem irrational, to make compliance seem like the only reasonable option. I mentally documented everything, creating a detailed inventory that would have made my therapist proud. There was the gaslighting, grading my history to make my independence look like instability, my entrepreneurship like foolishness, my choices like mistakes I was too stubborn to recognize. There was the triangulation assing Lauren, Mike, Brad, and even Ashley as validators, forcing me to defend myself against a united front rather than just 2 parents. There was the false equivalency, comparing my meaningful consulting work to Mike's insurance sales as if a paycheck was the only measure of value, as if financial predictability and personal fulfillment were the same thing. There was the weaponized concern, turning every criticism into care, every invasion into love, every attempt at control into helpfulness. And there was the constantly moving goalpost. No matter what I achieved, it was never the right achievement, never enough, never what they'd actually meant when they said they wanted me to be happy. My mother was telling a story about my college graduation, how proud they'd been, how excited about my future. But I remembered that day differently. I remembered my father asking why I hadn't been selected for the honors program when my GPA was high enough. I remembered my mother commenting that my dress was a bit tight and suggesting I'd gained weight during finals week. I remembered feeling like even my accomplishments were preludes to criticism, like success was just an opportunity for them to identify how it could have been better. But here, at this table, with Ashley as the new audience, the story was being rewritten as evidence of their unconditional support, their unwavering belief in me that I'd somehow betrayed by not following the path they'd illuminated. The family control was so complete, so totalizing, that they could rewrite reality in real time and everyone would nod along, validating a version of history that bore little resemblance to what had actually happened. I stayed calm, which was harder than it sounds when your entire sense of self is being systematically demolished by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Every instinct screamed at me to fight back, to correct the record, to make them see the truth. But I'd fought back before, hundreds of times over 34 years, and it never worked. It only gave them ammunition, proof that I was defensive, emotional, unable to handle constructive feedback, too immature to accept guidance. So instead, I took slow, measured breaths and watched my father's hands as he gestured, noting how he only pointed his finger when he was particularly pleased with an argument he was making. I observed my mother's face, how her expression shifted depending on who she was addressing, wounded and martyred when looking at me, knowing and conspiratorial when glancing at Lauren. The thing about controlling parents is they expect certain reactions because they've spent decades training you to respond in predictable ways. They expect you to argue, to justify, to apologize, to eventually cave and admit they might have a point. Your compliance feeds their sense of authority. Your emotional reactions prove you're not mature enough to make your own decisions. It's a self-perpetuating system that runs on your participation, on your willingness to play the role they've assigned you. But when you stop participating, when you go quiet and observant instead of defensive and reactive, something interesting happens. They lose their footing. I watched confusion flicker across my mother's face when I didn't rise to her bait about being unmarried at 34. I saw my father pause mid-sentence when I didn't interrupt to defend my business model. Ashley asked me a direct question. Rachel, don't you ever worry about your future? About being alone? And for a moment, the entire table went silent, waiting to see how I'd respond. My parents were poised to pounce on whatever I said, ready to twist it into further evidence of my delusion or denial. Lauren leaned forward slightly, probably expecting me to get defensive or emotional. But I just looked at Ashley, really looked at her, and said, no. I don't worry about that. 5 words, no justification, no explanation, no defense. Just a simple statement of fact that needed no elaboration. The look on my father's face was almost comical. Had been preparing his rebuttal, had probably rehearsed it during whatever pre-dinner planning session they'd held, and now he had nothing to rebut. My simple certainty had short-circuited the entire script. I observed how uncomfortable my quiet confidence made everyone. In their narrative, I was supposed to be struggling, lonely, slowly waking up to the realization that they'd been right all along. My calm contentment and offended, unjustified contentment didn't fit their story. So they tried to complicate it. My mother brought up biological clocks and fertility windows. My father mentioned retirement planning and long-term financial security for the 3rd time. Lauren started talking about the importance of building equity and having something to show for your 30s. Brad shared statistics about the instability of small businesses and the high failure rate of consultants. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick, working overtime to maintain their version of reality, to crack my composure. And I just sat there, eating my pot roast, sipping my wine, and taking mental notes. Because somewhere between the salad and the main course, I'd realized something crucial. I didn't need to win this argument. I didn't need to convince them. I didn't even need them to understand. I just needed to stop letting them convince me that their fear-based version of success was more valid than my lived experience of fulfillment. And as that realization settled into my bones like truth finally finding its home, I felt something else settle there too, the beginning of a response they would never see coming, a moment of gratitude they would never forget. While my mother cleared the dinner plates, refusing help with a tight smile that said, "Your guests tonight, even though we're about to dissect your life," I made a decision that would change everything. It wasn't dramatic. There was no lightning bolt, no cinematic moment of clarity. It was quieter than that, more deliberate. I reached into my purse under the table and pulled out my phone, keeping it hidden in my lap. The decision no one sees is always the most powerful one, I realized. While they were busy orchestrating this intervention, convinced they had me cornered, I was making choices they couldn't control, couldn't manipulate, couldn't even perceive. I opened my notes app and started typing, creating a list I'd been mentally composing for years but had never had the courage to actually write down. The title of the document was Simple Things I'm Grateful For. Underneath, I started listing every single thing they'd done for me that I genuinely appreciated, stripped of obligation, stripped of guilt, stripped of the expectation that gratitude meant obedience. Thank you for paying for my education. Thank you for providing a stable home during my childhood. Thank you for teaching me the value of hard work. Thank you for introducing me to books and learning. The list was shorter than they would have expected, shorter than they would have liked, but it was honest. Every item was something I could acknowledge with genuine appreciation, without the poisonous aftertaste of conditional love. I looked at that list and realized something profound: I could be grateful for what they'd given me without being indebted to them for life. Next, I opened my email and did something I'd been avoiding out of fear. I pulled up the message from David, my boyfriend they didn't know about, asking if he could come to the next family dinner and finally meet my parents. I'd been putting him off for months, making excuses, protecting him from this exact kind of evening. But sitting at that table, watching my family try to script my entire future without any input from the person actually living it, I typed a response: yes. Next time. I'm ready. I love you, and am done hiding that. I scheduled the email to send at 9 p.m, after I'd be safely home, after this dinner would be over. The quiet choice felt revolutionary, choosing my own relationship over their approval, choosing authenticity over performance. The decision I was making, sitting there with dessert being prepared in the kitchen, was to stop accepting their framework entirely. Not to argue within it, not to defend myself against their accusations, not to prove I was making good choices by their metrics, but to simply step outside their entire system of measurement. It sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but for someone who had spent 34 years desperately trying to earn gold stars from judges who kept changing the criteria, it was seismic. I thought about all the opportunities I'd second-guessed because they didn't approve. The promotion I'd hesitated to accept because my mother said it would make me too busy for family. The apartment I'd almost not rented because my father said it was too expensive for someone without a stable income. All the ways I'd let their voices in my head drown out my own certainty. I composed a text message to my therapist, even though I wouldn't send it until our next session. I'm doing it. The thing we talked about. The gratitude strategy. It's happening right now. We'd been working on this approach for weeks, the idea that I could thank them for what they'd actually done while refusing to accept the debt they claimed it created. Gratitude without guilt. Appreciation without obligation. Acknowledgement without surrender. It had seemed theoretical in her office, a strategy we might use someday. But sitting at this table, I realized someday was now. The family pressure at dinner had reached such an absurd peak that it had actually clarified everything, had finally given me the push I needed to try something radically different. Then I did something that surprised even me. I opened my banking app and looked at my business account, the one they didn't know about because I'd learned to keep my financial life completely separate from family scrutiny. The balance showed $73,000, money I'd earned over 2 years of building my consulting business, money that represented not just income but validation that my work had value, that clients were willing to pay for my expertise. I had another $42,000 in savings, $28,000 in my retirement account. I was financially stable, financially independent, and I had been for longer than they knew. Looking at those numbers, I felt my resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. They could call my business a little consulting thing all they wanted. The numbers told a different story. I had one more prepared action, something I'd been rehearsing in therapy but never thought I'd actually have the courage to execute. I opened a new note and started writing what I would say when dessert was served, when they expected me to capitulate or at least show signs of breaking. I wrote it carefully, editing as I went, making sure every word was true, every phrase was clear, every sentence served my purpose rather than their narrative. I'm grateful for what you've given me. Hey race, how I'll show that gratitude. The words were simple, but they represented a seismic shift in power dynamics. I wasn't refusing their framework, I was accepting it and then redefining it entirely. Gratitude on my terms, not theirs. Nobody at that table knew what was happening in my hands, hidden beneath the white tablecloth and the general bustle of clearing plates. They saw a quiet daughter, finally learning her place, finally understanding the wisdom of her elders. What they didn't see was a woman making decisions, setting boundaries, preparing for a moment of truth that would shift everything. My mother brought out her famous apple pie, the one she made with extra cinnamon and served warm with vanilla ice cream. My father started talking about the timeline for the interview at Brad's firm, about how I should prepare, about what I should wear. I nodded noncommittally, making sounds of acknowledgement without actually committing to anything. And under the table, my phone held evidence of choices made, responses prepared, a future claimed. This was the beginning of my own family revenge stories, though revenge wasn't quite the right word. It was more like reclamation, taking back the narrative they'd spent 34 years controlling. The silent power reversal was already in motion, invisible but inevitable. And in about 10 minutes, when my mother asked me to say grace before dessert like she always did at these formal dinners, I was going to thank them in a way they would never forget. A way that would free me while honoring truth. They had no idea what was coming. My mother set the apple pie in the center of the table, and as she always did at formal family dinners, she looked at me and said, "Rachel, would you like to say grace?" It was a tradition, a role I'd played since childhood, the dutiful daughter offering thanks before dessert. But this time, instead of the rote prayer she expected, I set down my napkin, looked around the table at every face watching me, and said, "Actually, yes. I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to express my gratitude." The room went still. My mother smiled, thinking she'd finally broken through, thinking I was about to capitulate. My father leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. One action at the table, I thought, remembering my therapist's words. Sometimes that's all it takes to shift authority completely. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for paying for my education. That was a genuine gift, and I'm truly grateful. I paused, let that sink in, watched their faces begin to relax. Then I continued. I'm grateful that you taught me the value of hard work, even though we define that differently now. I'm grateful for the stable home you provided during my childhood. I'm grateful for the opportunities you created when I was young and unable to create them for myself. My mother's smile was growing wider, my father was nodding, and I could see Lauren starting to relax, thinking the intervention had worked, thinking I was finally seeing reason. But I want to be clear about what I'm grateful for and what I'm not responsible for. The temperature in the room shifted, like the moment before thunder. I'm not responsible for living the life you didn't get to live. I'm not responsible for making choices that make you comfortable. And I'm not responsible for being grateful for things that weren't actually gifts but were investments you now want returns on. The shift in authority was immediate and almost visible, like watching a power grid realign. My father's face went from satisfied to confused to angry in the space of 3 seconds. "Rachel, that's not we never said," but I kept going, my voice calm and clear, reading from the notes I'd prepared under the table. "You said I should be grateful, so let me tell you what I'm genuinely grateful for. I'm grateful that your criticism taught me to trust my own judgment. I'm grateful that your conditional love showed me what unconditional love should look like, so I knew it when I found it. I'm grateful that your narrow definition of success pushed me to define success for myself. I'm grateful that you gave me exactly enough support to launch but not enough control to cage me. The family control they'd wielded so effortlessly all evening was crumbling in real time, and I could see panic beginning to dawn in their eyes. My mother tried to salvage the situation with her usual tactics. Sweetheart, you're upset. You're being emotional. We're not trying to control you, we're trying to help you. But ID spent the last hour observing her patterns, and I recognized this move: the dismissal of my clarity as emotion, the reframing of my boundary setting as instability. Mom, I'm not upset. I'm actually clearer than I've ever been. And I'm grateful for that clarity, which came from years of therapy I paid for myself to process the family dynamics you still can't acknowledge. I pulled up my phone and showed them my bank account balances, something I'd never have had the courage to do before. You want to talk about my little consulting business? Let me show you what failure looks like. $73,000 in my business account. $42,000 in savings. $28,000 in retirement. 0 debt. That's what I built while you were telling everyone I was struggling. Lauren's mouth literally fell open. Mike looked genuinely shocked. Brad's expression shifted from condescending to confused. Ashley's eyes went wide. And my parents, their faces cycled through disbelief, confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to fear. Here's what I'm grateful for, I continued, and I could feel the power reversal completing itself with every word. I'm grateful that you taught me I didn't need your approval to succeed. I'm grateful that you showed me what conditional love looks like so I could recognize and reject it. I'm grateful that you gave me an education and then got out of my way, even if you did it unintentionally by being so critical that I stopped sharing my life with you. Every client who hired me, every dollar I earned, every choice I made that built this life, I did that. Not you. Me. Mike, predictably, tried to smooth things over. Ratch, come on, don't do this. Mom and Dad are just trying to help. They just want, but I cut him off, something I'd never done before. Mike, they want me to take a corporate job at Brad's firm so they can monitor my life and feel like they're still in control. They want me to follow the script they wrote instead of living the life I'm actually building. And I'm grateful, genuinely grateful, that I finally have the clarity to see that and the courage to say no. He looked stunned, unable to respond, and I realized that in all our years as siblings, I'd never actually stood up to the family narrative. I'd always been the younger sister who needed guidance, who was struggling, who was supposed to defer to everyone's wisdom. Not anymore. The public humiliation I'd endured all evening was being returned, but not through cruelty, through truth delivered with gratitude as a shield. You said I should be grateful for the job opportunity at Brad's firm. So thank you for thinking of me. My answer is no. Thank you for offering to help me course correct. I don't need correcting. Thank you for your concern about my future. I'm building exactly the future I want. I looked at each of them in turn. Thank you, Lauren, for showing me what happens when you sacrifice your dreams for approval. It taught me what I didn't want. Thank you, Brad, for your advice about traditional paths. It reminded me why I chose a different one. Thank you, Mike, for your concern. It showed me that loving someone doesn't mean living their life for them. My father found his voice again, harder than before, defensive in a way I'd rarely heard. If you're so independent, Rachel, if you're doing so well, then why do you need to throw it in our faces? Why can't you just accept that we love you and want what's best for you? And there it was, the question that had haunted me my whole life, the accusation that my boundaries were the real problem. But I had an answer now, one I'd been preparing for months. Dad, I'm not throwing anything in your faces. You assembled witnesses, created a formal intervention, spent 2 hours systematically dismantling my life choices, and told me to be grateful for it. So I am. I'm being grateful, honestly, specifically grateful for what you actually gave me, not what you think you gave me. I'm grateful for the education. I'm grateful for the childhood. But I'm not grateful for being treated like a failed investment. And I'm done pretending that your version of my life is more accurate than the one I'm actually living. The shift happened in that moment. I watched it cross both their faces, the realization that they couldn't manipulate me with gratitude anymore, couldn't guilt me with obligation, couldn't use their generosity as leverage. The old power structure had reversed completely, and the look of shocked recognition on their faces told me there was no going back to the way things were. The family dinner they'd designed to control me had become the moment I finally, irrevocably, set myself free. Lauren and Brad left within 10 minutes, mumbling something about the kids needing to get to bed even though it was barely 7:30. Brad avoided eye contact as he shook my hand at the door, and Lauren hugged me stiffly, whispering you didn't have to humiliate them like that so quietly only I could hear. I realized she wasn't defending our parents out of love, she was defending the system that had rewarded her compliance, the framework that made her sacrifices seem worthwhile. If I could be happy on my own terms, it meant she'd given up her dreams for nothing. As their car pulled away, I watched my mother's carefully constructed composure shatter like fine china hitting concrete. The abuser loses face when their performance is interrupted, when the script breaks down and witnesses see what's really happening behind the curtain. She'd worked so hard to orchestrate this perfect intervention, this demonstration of united family concern designed to bring me back in line, and ID dismantled it with nothing but truth wrapped in gratitude. "How dare you," my father said, his voice low and shaking with barely controlled rage. "How dare you embarrass us like that in front of your siblings? In front of Brad and Ashley. Do you have any idea what you've done? The disrespect you've shown?" I stayed near the door, my coat already on, purse in hand, ready to leave but wanting to finish this. "I told the truth, Dad. I thanked you for what you actually gave me while refusing to accept responsibility for things that aren't mine to carry. If that embarrasses you, maybe you should examine why truth feels like disrespect." His face flushed deep red, the vein in his temple pulsing the way it did when he was losing control. He looked like he wanted to yell, to assert his authority the way he had throughout my childhood, but something in my expression must have warned him that those tactics had lost their power. The family control they'd maintained for 34 years was crumbling in real time, and I could see the panic in his eyes as he felt it slipping away. My mother started crying real tears that smeared her carefully applied makeup and made her look older, smaller, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "We gave you everything," she sobbed, repeating it like a mantra, like saying it enough times would make it true, would reset the evening to the script she'd written. "We sacrificed for you. We put your needs first for your entire childhood. We loved you unconditionally. And this is how you repay us? By throwing our love back in our faces? By humiliating us in front of the family?" I felt that old, familiar guilt trying to take hold, that programming that said good daughters don't make their mothers cry, that love means accepting whatever treatment you receive with gratitude and silence. But ID learned to recognize it now, to see it for what it was: manipulation wearing the mask of hurt feelings. Mike pulled me aside into the hallway, his voice urgent and angry in a way ID rarely heard from him. "What the hell was that, Rachel? You completely blindsided them. You turned what was supposed to be a helpful family conversation into a public humiliation. You could have just said no to the job without all that. All that performance." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw someone had learned to survive in this family by being agreeable, by not making waves, by accepting their narrative as truth because it was easier than constant conflict. "Mike," they assembled witnesses, created a formal intervention, spent 2 hours systematically tearing apart my life, and told me to be grateful for it. I was grateful, honestly grateful for what they actually did, not what they think they did. If they experienced that as humiliation, that's not on me. The fallout was spreading in real time through text messages that started arriving almost immediately. "Lauren, Mom won't stop crying. Dad's talking about cutting you off from family events. Was proving a point really worth destroying the family?" I stared at the message, waiting for the panic to hit, the fear of being excluded, the terror of losing my family. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something close to relief mixed with sadness. I texted back I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending their version of reality was more accurate than mine. She didn't respond. Then came a text from Ashley. "I don't know the full history here, but that tip guts. Mike's upset, but I think he knows you were right." I appreciated that more than she could. No one witness had actually seen what happened instead of what they wanted to see. My father found his voice again, cold and controlled in that way that was somehow worse than yelling. If this is how you're going to be, Rachel, then maybe you should leave. Clearly, you don't value this family. Clearly, our love and concern mean nothing to you. Clearly, you'd rather destroy relationships than accept help from people who've only ever wanted the best for you. He was trying to hurt me, trying to use rejection as a weapon the way he'd done countless times throughout my life. But I'd been preparing for this, building up immunity to this exact poison. I'm already leaving, Dad. But just so we're clear, I do value this family. What I don't value is being treated like a project that failed, like an investment that didn't yield the returns you expected. I thanked you for what you actually gave me. I'm sorry that wasn't enough, but I can't manufacture gratitude for things that hurt me. The change others noticed wasn't just in mine, it was in the entire family system. Without me playing my role as the problem child, the one who needed fixing, the one whose life served as a cautionary tale, the whole dynamic had to shift. I could see it in their faces, the confusion and anger of people whose familiar patterns had been disrupted by someone refusing to play their assigned part. My mother stopped crying long enough to look at me with something I'd never quite seen before, not just disappointment, but a kind of bewildered betrayal, as if she genuinely couldn't understand how I'd arrived at this moment. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. "When you're 40 and alone, when you've pushed everyone away with your pride and stubbornness, when you finally realize we were right all along, you'll regret this. And we might not be here to help you pick up the pieces." It was meant to scare me, to make me reconsider, but all it did was confirm that nothing had changed for them. I walked to the door, my hand on the knob, and turned back one last time. "I thanked you tonight. Genuinely thanked you for the real gifts you gave me: education, childhood stability, the foundation that let me build my own life. That should have been enough. If it wasn't, if you need me to be grateful for control disguised as care and criticism disguised as concern, then you're right, I can't give you that. I won't give you that." Behind me, I could hear my mother's renewed sobbing, my father's heavy breathing, Mike's frustrated sigh. The sound of a family system collapsing under the weight of its own expectations, its own need for control, its own inability to love without conditions. I walked out into the cool night air, got in my 6-year-old car that ran perfectly fine, and drove toward a future I was finally ready to claim on my own terms. My phone buzzed, David responding to the email ID scheduled. "I love you. I'm proud of you. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time all evening. The public family dinner that was supposed to shame me into compliance had instead freed me into authenticity. The gratitude they demanded had become the weapon I used to set myself free. And I was never going back. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, just breathing and letting the adrenaline work its way through my system. The street was quiet, lined with houses identical to my parents' perfectly manicured lawns, 2-car garages, warm lights glowing in windows that looked inviting from the outside. Perfect suburban facades hiding who knows what kind of family drama, what kinds of silent battles, what versions of the scene I'd just walked away from. My hands were shaking slightly, my heart still racing from the confrontation, but underneath the physical reaction was something I'd never quite felt before: freedom. Silence was strategy, I realized. All those years I'd thought staying quiet meant I was weak, that absorbing their criticism without fighting back meant I was being mature, being the bigger person. But tonight I'd learned that silence could be observation, preparation, the gathering of strength before the moment of truth. The final lesson crystallized as I drove through empty streets toward David's apartment, toward the life I'd been building in secret because I was afraid to claim it publicly. Control fails when witnesses see the truth. My parents had wielded their authority for so long because nobody ever questioned the narrative they presented. They were loving parents offering guidance. I was a struggling daughter who needed intervention. End of story. But when I'd responded to their demand for gratitude with actual gratitude, specific, honest gratitude for what they'd genuinely given me while refusing to accept responsibility for their expectations, the spell broke. It didn't matter that my parents doubled down, that my mother cried, that my father threatened to cut me off. What mattered was that for the first time, I'd named what was actually happening and framed it in language they couldn't argue with. How do you fight someone who's thanking you? How do you claim someone is ungrateful when they're expressing specific appreciation? You can't. And that's exactly why it worked. I thought about all the family revenge stories I'd read online over the years, tales of people who'd cut off contact or sent scorched earth emails or posted their grievances for the world to see. I'd always felt uncomfortable with those stories, like they were too aggressive, too final, too much like the very toxicity they were trying to escape. But I understood them now in a way I never had before. They weren't about revenge at all, they were about reclamation. Every person who'd ever stood up to toxic family dynamics was just trying to take back the parts of themselves that had been slowly eroded by years of criticism, years of being told their reality was wrong, years of emotional abuse in families disguised as love and concern. The dramatic confrontations weren't the point, they were just the visible moment when invisible damage finally became too heavy to carry silently. David was waiting for me when I arrived, and the moment I walked through his door, I started crying. Not sad crying, not scared crying, relieved crying, the kind that comes when you've been holding your breath for 34 years and finally exhale. He held me without asking questions, just let me cry until I was ready to talk. And when I told him everything, the intervention, the systematic humiliation, and then my response, the gratitude that wasn't capitulation but liberation, looked at me with something I'd never seen in my family's eyes: pride without conditions. "Rachel," he said quietly, "do you realize what you just did? You broke a cycle. That kind of family control doesn't just affect you, it would have affected our children if we have them, our entire life together. But you stopped it. Tonight, you actually stopped it." The silent power reversal I'd engineered wasn't really about power at all, it was about truth. I didn't need to control my parents or punish them or make them see things my way. I just needed them to stop controlling me, and the only way to make that happen was to stop accepting their framework, their definitions, their version of reality as more valid than my own lived experience. No more defending my choices as if they needed defending. No more justifying my life as if it needed justifying. No more accepting their criticism disguised as concern, their control disguised as care. The shift hadn't happened in the confrontation itself, that was just the visible symptom. The real shift had happened during those quiet moments of observation, when I'd stopped reacting and started choosing, stopped hoping they'd change and started changing what I was willing to accept. I got home to my apartment, the one they'd called too expensive, in a neighborhood they'd called questionable, with furniture they'd called inadequate, and I looked around with new eyes. The plants thriving on my windowsill because I'd learned to care for them. The artwork on my walls from local artists I'd discovered and supported. The bookshelf full of business books and novels that had shaped my thinking. The desk where I did work that mattered to me and to my clients. The couch where David and I spent lazy Sundays reading and talking. This wasn't a waiting room for a better life. This wasn't a temporary situation until I got serious. This was my life, the one I'd chosen, the one I'd built despite constant pressure to build something else. And it was exactly right. Not perfect, not what anyone else would choose, but exactly right for me. The truth about controlling parents is that they genuinely believe they're helping. They've convinced themselves that their criticism is wisdom, their manipulation is guidance, their emotional abuse is love. My parents weren't villains in some family revenge stories, they were scared people trying to control what they feared, acting out patterns they'd probably inherited from their own parents, unable to see that love without trust isn't really love at all. Understanding that didn't mean I had to accept their behavior, but it helped me let go of the fantasy that someday they'd wake up and apologize, that eventually they'd realize what they'd done and change. They probably wouldn't. They'd probably tell this story at future family gatherings as evidence of my ingratitude, my pride, my tragic independence that would surely lead to ruin. And I had to be okay with that, had to choose my own peace over their approval, my own reality over their revision. That night, lying in my own bed with David beside me, I thought about what my mother had said as I was leaving: "You'll regret this when you're 40 and alone." But I wasn't alone. I had David, I had friends who valued me for who I actually was, I had clients who respected my work, I had a life full of people who didn't require me to be someone else to earn their love. And I wasn't going to regret this. I was going to remember this as the night I finally stopped performing gratitude for things that hurt me, the night I offered genuine thanks for genuine gifts while refusing to accept blame for imaginary debts. The family dinner that was supposed to shame me into compliance had instead given me the perfect opportunity to set myself free using their own weapon against them. They demanded gratitude, and I'd give an ethnicist, specific, boundaried gratitude that honored truth while refusing manipulation. Control fails when witnesses see the truth, yes. But more importantly, control fails when the controlled person stops accepting the story they're told about themselves and starts living the truth they know in their bones. I'd thanked them in front of everyone, and in doing so, I'd thanked myself for finally having the courage to be free. That was the greatest reversal of all. And it felt exactly like coming home to myself after a lifetime of living in someone else's house. 6 months have passed since that dinner, and my life looks fundamentally different now, not because everything changed overnight, but because I changed what I was willing to accept as gratitude. My parents and I haven't spoken since that night. There have been attempts at contact, voicemails from my mother suggesting I need to apologize for embarrassing them, emails from my father with articles about the importance of family, messages from Lauren asking when I'm going to get over myself and make things right. The family drama continues without me, I'm sure. They've probably crafted elaborate narratives to explain my absence, new versions of history where I'm the ungrateful daughter who threw their love back in their faces. And honestly, I sleep better than I have in years. The absence of their constant demands for gratitude is obedience, their relentless attempts to frame my autonomy as disrespect, their weaponized appreciation. It's like finally putting down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. What I've learned in these 6 months is that real gratitude and manufactured obligation are completely different things. I am genuinely grateful for my education. I use that degree every day in my consulting work. I am genuinely grateful for the stable childhood home it gave me, a foundation that many people don't have. I am genuinely grateful for the early opportunities they created when I was too young to create them myself. But I'm not grateful for the emotional manipulation. I'm not grateful for the conditional love. I'm not grateful for being treated like an investment that didn't yield the returns they expected. And the beautiful thing I've discovered is that I can hold both truths simultaneously: appreciation for real gifts and rejection of imaginary debts. They taught me that gratitude was all or nothing, that appreciating anything meant accepting everything. But they were wrong. The silent power reversal that began at that public family dinner didn't end when I walked out the door. It continues every day, in ways both subtle and profound. It's in the relationship with David that's deepening because I'm no longer hiding it or second-guessing it based on what my parents might think. It's in the business decision I made last month to turn down a high-paying client whose values didn't align with mine, a decision I made without consulting anyone, without seeking approval, without justifying it to people who would have told me I was being foolish. It's in the way I say thank you now to friends, to colleagues, to David, and mean it purely, without the contamination of obligation or the fear that appreciation creates debt. Every boundary I maintain, every choice I make from a place of clarity rather than guilt, reinforces that I made the right decision. Not the easy decision, but the right one. So here's what I want to ask you, because if you've read this far, something in this story has touched a nerve that's probably been raw for years. Where in your life are you being told to be grateful when what they really mean is be obedient? Who in your life is weaponizing gratitude, turning appreciation into obligation, using the language of thankfulness to control your choices? What gifts have you received that came with invisible price tags you're still being asked to pay? And here's the harder question: what would happen if you offered genuine gratitude for what was genuinely given while refusing to accept responsibility for expectations that were never discussed, never agreed to, never fair? What would happen if you thanked them specifically, honestly, for real gifts while drawing a boundary around imaginary debts? Think about the family pressure at dinner in your own life, maybe not literal dinner tables, maybe just the moments when you're reminded that you should be grateful, when love feels less like a gift and more like a contract with clauses you never read and terms you never accepted. What would it look like to reclaim gratitude as something pure, something you offer freely for things you genuinely appreciate, rather than something extracted from you as proof of compliance? What would it feel like to say, thank you for what you actually gave me, but I'm not responsible for what you wished you'd given me or what you think that gift entitled you to? I'm not saying it's easy, God knows it wasn't easy for me. But I am saying it's possible, and I'm saying you deserve it. You deserve to experience gratitude as appreciation rather than imprisonment. The toxic family dynamics I described aren't unique to my family, they exist in countless variations across millions of households. Maybe your version involves parents who bring up every sacrifice they ever made whenever you try to set a boundary. Maybe it's a spouse who keeps a mental ledger of everything they've done for you and presents the bill whenever you disagree. Maybe it's friends who remind you of their generosity whenever you can't do what they want. Maybe it's siblings who frame your success as ingratitude because it highlights their own compromises. The specifics vary, but the pattern is the same. Someone benefits from your sense of obligation, from weaponizing gratitude, from making you believe that appreciation and obedience are the same thing. And the only way to break that pattern is to reclaim gratitude as something you give freely for genuine gifts while refusing to accept debts that were never real. I won't lie to you and say that standing up for yourself comes without cost. I lost my relationship with my parents, at least for now, maybe forever. I lost the fantasy of the family I'd always hoped we could be. I lost the comfort of familiar patterns, even when those patterns were slowly suffocating me. But what I gained me self-respect, my ability to experience genuine gratitude without contamination, my freedom to build a life based on my own values rather than their expectations, my relationships with people who don't require me to be smaller to make them comfortable is worth infinitely more than what I lost. Every day that passes, I become more certain of that trade. Every time I say thank you and mean it purely, without the weight of obligation, I'm reminded that I made the right choice. So what about you? Are you ready to stop accepting gratitude as a weapon and reclaim it as something beautiful? Are you ready to thank people honestly for what they've actually given you while refusing to accept responsibility for debts they claim you owe? Are you ready to draw a line between genuine appreciation and manufactured obligation? It won't be comfortable. People who benefit from weaponized gratitude will call you ungrateful, selfish, disrespectful. They'll remind you of every sacrifice they've ever made, every gift they've ever given, every kindness they've ever shown. But here's the secret: they don't want you to know if their love requires you to be perpetually indebted. It was never love in the first place. That dinner where my mother said be grateful and I thanked her in front of everyone, that was just the beginning of my story of reclamation. What will be the beginning of yours? If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you feel less alone in your own struggles with family control and emotional abuse in families disguised as gratitude, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below sharing your experience, even if it's just "I needed this today" or "this is exactly what I've been feeling." It helps me know these stories matter, that the truth needs to be told even when it's uncomfortable. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and smash that notification bell. I share stories like this regularly: raw, honest accounts of breaking free from toxic patterns, reclaiming words that have been weaponized against us, and building lives based on genuine gratitude rather than manufactured guilt. You deserve to be part of a community that understands the difference between appreciation and obligation, that won't judge you for setting boundaries around gratitude, that knows that saying thank you doesn't mean saying you own me. So join us. Your future self, the one who can experience gratitude without suffocation, who can appreciate gifts without accepting imaginary debts, who can love family while still protecting themselves, will thank you for it. And that thank you? It'll be genuine, pure, and completely free of obligation. Just the way gratitude was always meant to be.